Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We have heard Dr. Israr Ahmed's presentation on two very sensitive issues: the political system of Islam and the economic system of Islam. The two areas are very sensitive. One of us has his own sensibilities, coming from different cultures, of course, different mindset. We may have different ideas, but Dr. Israr Ahmed is essentially representing Quran and Hadith. That is his normative point of view. Now, for interaction, I would first request Dr. Norton.
I have listened attentively to what you've said, and I feel obligated as a proud Jew, let me say, who believes in Judaism, but perhaps even more importantly, as an open-minded and I hope compassionate human being, and as an advocate of democracy, I really feel that I must make a brief, respectful, but also frank comment that you may answer if you wish. Now, for much of my life in my teaching, writing, and human rights activity, I have struggled against the Jewish exclusivity of the State of Israel, made so by its Zionist character. As a number of great Jewish thinkers have argued in the past, and do argue today, this exclusivity is in opposition to basic human values in Judaism. This state incorrectly presumes to speak for all the Jews of the world. This state is an exclusivist one because it grants rights and privileges by law to Jews, not granted to non-Jews. This state has also oppressed the indigenous Palestinian population in order to maintain itself as a Zionist state. Here is the heart center of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. As I already stated, I have opposed and do oppose the exclusivist state of Israel, just as I oppose other types of exclusivist states based upon race, color, and or religion. I have witnessed in the past decade especially growing numbers of Jews who, although still a minority, agree with the position that I have. This minority includes both religious and secular Jews. The religious Jews, by the way, believe that today the Torah is valid, alive, and is correctly the Word of God, just as you believe the same for the Quran. They, by the way, would be surprised, as frankly was I, if they heard or read some of your interpretations of Judaism that they consider to be factually incorrect, such as your comments yesterday about Torah following the destruction of the first temple in 586 before the Common Era, the meaning of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and your written comment in this pamphlet about Jews believing they are exempt from punishment by God on the Day of Judgment, which, according to Judaism, is not correct. The Jews, religious and secular, who believe, as do I, about exclusivist states, obviously reject your advocacy of an Islamic state in Israel or anywhere else in which non-Jews and others do not have all the same human rights, including all of the political rights, that includes the right to vote as well, as do Muslims. Those Jews who believe in Zionism and support the Jewish exclusivist state, they also, of course, certainly reject your idea that could, if your advocacy prevails totally at any time in the future, could result at some point in an Islamic state in all of historic Palestine, which encompasses the present state of Israel. Presently, then, 5.2 million Jews reside in Israel. Not many, if any, Israeli Jews would accept your advocacy of Islamic State. In the late 1970s, at a meeting in London organized by the Organization of the Islamic Conference, to which I was invited as a panelist, I said this to the Palestinian Islamic theologian Ismail al-Farouqi, who advocated an Islamic State for the whole Middle East, including Palestine, Israel. He answered that the only three choices for Jews in Palestine would be to leave, to accept the Islamic State, or to stay, fight, and then be expelled or killed. Now, before asking you to state if you would answer likewise, I wish to point out briefly, in addition, that an American scholar from Harvard, as you probably know, Samuel Huntington, espoused a theory a few years ago that there was a clash of civilizations between the West and Islam. Some other scholars agree with this theory. Some, like myself, argue that this theory is incorrect. Key advisors to President George W. Bush believe and advocate this theory. What you have said indicates to me that you believe this theory to be correct, even though you were on the Islamic side of the argument. If I am correct in my assumption, you are, I suggest, actually helping the advocacy of the Bush advisors, even though that is, of course, not your intent. Perhaps you would also comment upon this. Again, I make this comment respectfully but sincerely. Yesterday, you advocated serious debate and dialogue with non-Muslims. I also make my brief comment in that context and with that spirit. Admittedly, I am ready to pursue further discussion, debate, and dialogue with you, although, given your belief that you have the truth from God through Muhammad, I certainly do not think that I can shake you even to question your faith. And I have doubts that you will be able to convince me to believe differently than I do. Perhaps then the discussion will be useful only to the extent that we make sure we understand one another's positions and views correctly. Thank you.
I don't think I have to say anything about these comments except one. The alternatives for Jews or Christians or Hindus or Sikhs or in Islamic State, they are not only three, that either they leave or they become Muslims or they fight. No. I told you they can remain in Islamic State, they can remain Jews, they can remain Christians, they can remain Sikhs, they can remain Hindus. But the overall political socio-economic system will be Islamic. But you have the right to believe anything, you have the right to worship anything in any way you like. You have the authority to practice your own personal law. I have told you this.
They could stay.
Yes.
That's
definitely.
one option.
Definitely.
There are two others.
But they are not equal citizens.
May I? Have you?
Yes, I'm done.
Thank you. I think I have a couple of observations, questions, precisely on issues relating to the minority management in a state envisioned along the lines that you have mentioned. What I'm trying to figure out really is this, that is there, firstly, a critical mass attached or associated with this concept that the majority shall to declare a state, Islamic state, be 51% or 99% or something like that? Is there some such critical mass associated with it?
I don't think there is any.
Because I want to then proceed from there, because if we take the position of 51-49, we take position of 50.1 and 49.9, I think we are in for a big trouble. And likewise, we are in a big trouble. In fact, at any point, at any stage of this curve, any stage, and I shall try and explain it to you how, that we take a situation of any hypothetical country where you have a certain percentage of people who are so-called minorities. They have a right to live. They have a right to work. They have a right to produce children. They have a right to feed them. And they have a right to tell them, hey, this is your God. They don't have a right to tell the others, this is my God. But the others have a right to tell them, this is my God and this is the God that is the true God, and therefore you better believe in it because that is my purpose and my mission. And now we are, I think, trying to create a different kind of situation here, firstly, that in terms of the cultural and religious identity of people, the so-called freedom really is in name, because the freedom essentially implies co-equality of some kind. Otherwise, it is no freedom, because if there are constraints on freedom, because it's a relationship of a transaction, and if it is not a transactional situation, I think really the persons are constrained. That's one part of the thing. And then...
I think we take it one by one.
Okay, yes, sir.
Actually, you are thinking the modern sense of a secular state. What is a secular state? All religions as religions are equal. In theory at least. Although every state can have some state religion, but no, all are equal. But regarding the collective system, the politico-socio-economic system, there is going to be no say of any religion. This is 100% against Islam. As I described yesterday, Islam is a deen, not a mazhab. It's a system. There can be no two systems coexisting. Islam doesn't believe in that. One has to be superior, the other inferior. The inferior one will become mazhab. That will be a religion. A set of beliefs and set of worship and this, that's all. But the system would be the dominant system. Will be, for example, for America, they want its own system of economy, their own system of liberal democracy and secular democracy, etc., etc. Secondly, this concept of minority and this percentage, 51% or 49%, actually Islam as a system can only be established through a revolutionary process. And a revolution is always brought about by a minority. Were the communists in majority in Russia to bring about the Bolshevik revolution? They have an ideology, they present the ideology, it is accepted, and then those people who accept they are integrated, organized, and then they topple the system. So this is actually Islam, if it comes, and I think it is going to come, it is going to be the just world order of Islam.
I think this concept really about the revolution coming from a minority and creating an Islamic state possibly will hold good where the very significant majority of the population is Muslims.
No, Brother Nirmal, we have before us the model of Muhammad. He was a single person. He propagated an ideology. He got one by one. Even after 10 years hardest labor, he didn't have more than 125 people with him. But then a whole revolution was brought about. So revolution means revolution. It has its own mechanics.
Dr. Roger, please.
Dr. Ahmed, I'm beginning to understand your line of thought at this point. You are outlining to us an idealized system which you have thought through deeply, and there's one process missing. That process is by which the caliphate becomes how it is created, the process of the creation. It comes about through the jihad. And yet we already know that the jihad in Pakistan has been commercialized by US money. But that's by the by. My main point is that revolution comes about through the overthrow of the state. And we know a great deal about revolution, because whatever revolution has happened in the past has always been determined by the process that the revolution comes about. And you haven't mentioned to us, you haven't discussed that actual process itself. Now, let us look at only very, very briefly one revolution. And that was the Russian Revolution. And the very process that revolution took place undermined it. It was destroyed by the process itself. It was not destroyed, as you said, by the system of lack of incentives. That was a byway. The key thing was that it tried to create a socialism in one country. And Trotsky wrote about that. And the point that I'm making is this. The Western ruling classes took up jihad, in using the modern terms, not their own term, but the Western ruling classes took up jihad against communism and fought it to the death. Because it was only in one country, a big country, a rich country, but in only one country. And the very process that your Islamic State is created has been missed out altogether. And the idealized version that you give us is only an idealized version, and we know from the past that the idealism from which it starts will be undermined by the process itself.
Well, I have to make two comments. Number one, the process through which a revolution comes is going to be the topic of my talk tomorrow. So you are ahead of the schedule. Number two, when I was discussing ayah number 59 of the 5th surah, I should have said, because the constraint of time was too much, that Quran has not discussed how these people of authority will come up. Oh, you who profess to believe, you have to obey God, His messenger, and the people of authority from amongst yourselves. How they will come up? By mutual consultation. But the process of mutual consultation can be different. As I said, in a tribal society, the chiefs of the tribes, the heads of different houses and dynasties, they sit together and they decide. So Abu Bakr was chosen. In the same way, Abu Bakr appointed Umar, but by consulting the people and having their consent. So these things, they are there, but today we can have a new system, and I said this adult franchise, and all the Muslims will be voting for the Caliph. So I think I had talked about that, but you very rightly pointed to a vacuum in my talk.
I would like to follow on the heels of Roger's comments. It seems to me that the methodological thrust of your talk in general is based on a certain normative understanding of Islam. First of all, on the understanding of the Quran, the Sunnah, but above all, on a limited part of Islamic history, especially in the first 20 years of early Islam during the rightly guided caliphate, Al-Khilafah Rashida. And in that sense, it seems to me that 1400 years of Islamic history is absent from your own methodology, because you did not talk about that, although this is very significant. And this is somewhat problematic, and I want to give an example in terms of that methodological thrust. Let's say nowadays the ulama in Saudi Arabia are somewhat split over political authority of the Saudi regime. Although the majority of the ulama in Saudi Arabia support the regime, there is a substantial minority that does not support the regime, and both ulama, those who support and those who oppose, are based their own judgment on the same normative understanding of Islam, on the Quran, on the traditions, as well as on that limited period of Islamic history. They rarely talk about 1400 years of Islamic history. They come to different conclusions, that the majority want to preserve the status quo, whereas the minority wants to topple the status quo. So that's somewhat problematic that I see in terms of the methodological thrust. Another thing is in terms of Islamic institutions. I mean, you mentioned in passing there is no pope in Islam, which can be true, I mean, in a sense. But that does not mean that Islamic history has not been full of Islamic institutions that have been as powerful as the Vatican in the Catholic world. So to say that Islamic history hasn't had institutions is not and has not been accurate historically speaking. And therefore it seems to me that in order to have more force to the argument that you have presented, we have to include what I would call historical Islam in the discussion. And this is what has been missing in your presentation.
I agree with you 100% that has been missing, and it is intentional on my part. I say we have to take guidance from Quran, Sunnah, life of Muhammad, and the past caliphate. That's all. It was Islam, total Islam, full Islam. Afterwards, it was not total Islam. The 1400 years you are talking about is the history of Muslims, not of Islam. The Prophet said, you know it better than myself, Bada al-Islamu ghariban wa sayaudu kama bada. Islam started that it was a strange thing for people. And very soon it will become strange again. It was the growth of the Muslim as a nation and the Arabs as a nation. And it was Arab imperialism. It was monarchy. It was a dynasty which was ruling. And the institutions that developed that were under that monarchy. And that all of them were under the influence. So we have to go back to Quran and the Sunnah and the life of the Prophet and only the rightly guided four caliphs. That's all. Guidance is from there. Rest is history.
Dr. Mumtaz, please.
And if you like, I can quote another hadith. The Prophet said that takunu nabuwatu fikum ma sha Allah an takun. Summa Allah will yarfa'uha iza sha yarfa'uha. Summa takunu khilafatan minhaj an-nabuwah. It will be there so long as Allah wants it to be there. Then there will be a period of kingship, cruel kingship. The kingships of the Umayyads, the kingships of the Abbasids. That was not Islam. We have to be very clear in this regard. And we have to revive Islam, not the Umayyad Islam or the Abbasid Islam. And that is why I emphasize that we have to adopt the prophetic model of bringing a revolution, about which I will be talking tomorrow, inshallah.
Dr. Mumtaz Ahmed,
Janab.
it is his cup of tea.
Yeah.
Professor of Political Science.
Without milk. Okay. It appears to me that the Islamic society that you envision, in my view, will not be a society in which Muslims and non-Muslims will live in peace and harmony. First of all, you said that they will not be given equal citizenship with the Muslims. So there will always be a feeling of being second-class citizens, and I can assure you, sir, no one wants to live as a second-class citizen. Are we creating an apartheid, in other words, in an Islamic society? If we deprive them, as you have suggested, of holding positions of higher responsibility and ban those positions for them forever, what are the type of occupations that they are going to pursue? We cannot employ them in education because education is a very sacred thing in Islamic State where children will be indoctrinated in Islamic ideology. We cannot employ them in foreign office because Pakistan's foreign policy or Islamic State's foreign policy will be based on pursuing Islamic objectives. You cannot have them in legislature. You cannot have them in judiciary because judiciary will be making Islamic legal decisions. So what are the areas left in which they will operate? My feeling is that we will have an alienated minority, and if we take into consideration the fact that there are large number of Muslim societies where the number of non-Muslims is considerable. I'm thinking of Malaysia, Indonesia, Egypt, Bangladesh. These societies will always be a conflict-ridden, tension-ridden societies. One. Secondly, you said that Quran prohibits Muslims to obey non-Muslim authorities. And that brings me back to my situation in the United States and 5-6 million Muslims who are living in the United States and millions who are living in Europe and 140 million who are living in India. Are we to defy the political authority of the societies in which we are living because they are non-Muslims? These are my comments. Concrete question I have is, you talked about shura, consultation. I have two questions about that. One, what is the concrete shape of shura that you suggest? Secondly, will the decisions made by this shura be based on consensus or on majority decision? Thirdly, will the decisions of shura be binding on the ruler, or they will just be recommendatory, as was the Haq's shura?
Now, where to start? Number one, I did admit in the first instance that the non-Muslims in Islamic State are not equal citizens, not full citizens. Whether you like it or not, this is my opinion. In Islamic State, it's an ideological state, it's not a nation state. The professions, they can be doctors, they can be engineers, they can be businessmen, they can be teachers, teaching scientific disciplines. They can be in service. But only top position, where basic policy of the state is formed, only those will be exempted. Otherwise, business will be open to them, professions will be open to them. Go ahead. So this is the second point. And I have to be reminded by you what was the third point.
Even I thought
No, apartheid,
related to that, my question was that this type of society, ipso facto, will be a conflict-ridden society, not peace with itself.
In every society there is conflict between the haves and the have-nots. Apartheid was based on color, race, and the discrimination, you may call it, in an Islamic state is based on ideology. Any black person, any person belonging to any other race, any other region of the world can adopt the ideology and he can become the full citizen.
But sir, will it matter to me whether I have been discriminated against on the basis of my color or on the basis of my ideology? The fact remains that I have been discriminated.
In Islamic state, in all ideological states, there has to be a discrimination on the basis of ideology. Otherwise, it is not an ideological state.
Does that not promote conflict? Does that, by definition, then, as was asked here, not promote conflict? Be it discrimination because of color, we know that's promoted conflict. Because of race, we know that's promoted conflict. Or be it religion, we also know that's promoted conflict. So, will that not be the case here?
Is there any society absolutely free from conflict?
No, but the question is, will that promote it?
I told you yesterday about jihad. Every living being is making jihad. The struggle for existence, the conflict is there.
We're talking about conflicts between communities. And I think that we have one major recent example in Islamic history, the example of the Sudan. Because the Islamic government of the Sudan, after Bashir came to power in 1989, under the influence of Hassan Torabi, wanted to implement Islamic law in the same way that you have been portraying here. And we know that the results have not been successful so far. Because that kind of implementation, in addition to other problems in the Sudan that go back to its own independence in 1954, there had been a major conflict between the Christian animistic South and the North Arab Islamic part of the Sudan. And we know that one of the major results of this conflict has been, in a sense, the weakening of the Islamic front headed by Hassan Turabi, and the signing of the agreement only last week between John Karanj and the government of the Sudan. So in a sense, that conflict has seeped away, has destroyed the energies of the Sudan as a state, and the alternative has not been Islamic. What we see now is more coexistence between the Christians in the south and the Muslims in the north.
My comment is that Islam in Sudan was coming through majority, not through any revolution. Were the Muslims actually practicing Islam totally?
There was a military
Did they make any dawah? Yes, it was a military coup, that's all. I told you Islamic State, true Islamic State can be established only through a revolution. Not because...
Yeah, he has yet to answer my question on the Shura.
That's right. I think he still has a few questions unanswered.
Yes, Shura in a modern Islamic State will be binding. Although parliamentary system is also mubah, permissible, and presidential also. But the presidential system today is nearer to the Islamic system. There is the chief executive and there is the Congress. And the chief executive is having his secretaries and ministers from wherever he likes, not from the Congress or the Senate. Because these two things have to be absolutely separate and distinct from each other. So this will be the case. Legislature will be the Shura, and it will be by majority. Only exception is that every citizen will have a right to knock the door of the superior courts, that this has transgressed the limits of the Sharia, because the item in the constitution would be no legislation can be done here at any level repugnant to the Quran and the Sunnah. And the chief executive will be the president. And that is nearer, to Islamic system. Yes, I think.
Paris, you want to come in?
My question is related with the previous subject. Now, just let us think that what you've said is totally correct and fits to Islam, Quran and Sunnah. But with thinking the very pragmatic side of it, that now, if you have an Islamic State in Pakistan, no, I mean, if you will have with Islamic revolution and you will successful, how many people are living here now? I think about 140 million.
Yes.
And then around 1 billion people are in danger then, Muslims. Because, I mean, if you exclude the rest and then the Muslims living in other states will be excluded as well. If you exclude non-Muslims here, I mean, you treat them in second, say, not first-class citizen, but second-class citizen. I think this is coming from British rule of caste system, first-class citizen, second-class citizen. Then all the Muslims will be treated in the other part of the world as second-class citizens. And just very pragmatic way of thinking, I think this is dangerous for the rest of the Muslims. What is your comment on this?
Brother, if you think pragmatically, we should bow before George Bush, and here is the safety.
Well, if we study Prophet's life, that there is a pragmatic way of approach.
Please let me say. But if you believe in something that is true, and your belief is there, you have to go by that. And if the Muslims in the non-Muslim majority countries are treated at par with the non-Muslims in Islamic State, I would be happy. They should have their mazhab. Their mazhab will be protected. And they will be minorities. I tell you, my study is that the Muslims in India have no benefit from this system, from secularism. None. And if they say we are a minority, give us our rights as a minority, they will be far better.
My questions
I've got two questions, one theological and one directly related to this. So if I take the latter first, if I take the question about, like Norton, Christianity has a history of wanting to create Christian states. I mean, Christendom, I suppose, was the obvious example of this, but Richard Hooker in England argued that only an Englishman who was a member of the Church of England can be a full citizen, and you get versions of this all the time. T.S. Eliot, the 20th century poet, took a similar line in his idea of a Christian society, and in America they endlessly flirt with the idea of Christian America. And the question is simple, really. If a movement amongst Christians in a Christian nation develops to create a Christian state, would you be happy to live there as a second-class citizen defined in the way that you defined it, and also forbidden to proselytize and explain your faith to others in that society?
I have said already yes.
You would be happy to live
in the state? They have their right to establish the state according to their religion. Now there will be competition. What type of state you bring forth? What type of state Islam brings forth? And what is more acceptable to the humanity at large? There will be competition. Come on. Have a Christian state. Have a Hindu state. And tell us what Hindu state is. So this is my answer to this question.
Okay.
Now, next.
That's very helpful. Okay, my second question flows from that then, and it's a theological question. And I just want to focus for a moment on proselytizing, on missionary work. It's because I believe in God, and that God ultimately will not allow that which is what will be ultimately God will permit, that I don't spend all my time worrying about diversity in society, because the truth will come through. And it's because I'm confident in that truth, I would more than happily invite you to America to visit churches and to explain your understanding of Islam and let people decide what they think is true. Because the God we worship, I'm sufficiently confident in, will allow the varieties of forms of faith to emerge, and whatever is ultimately true can withstand diversity and questions and disagreement. And it's almost as if you don't have sufficient confidence, if you don't mind me saying so, in the God you worship, and you fear that if there are other people in society, they will endlessly undermine your faith. Sounds as if you're not that confident that your faith can withstand diverse perspectives.
As far as this question of somebody, some Christian coming to our mosque and be allowed to present his case, I think it is not against Islam. What the missions do, they go and address the depressed classes of the society. And there they help them. And they change their faith on this basis, not on their argument. This is mission. This we will not allow. Number two, because Islam is a state, we can't allow anything which can erode the state. We have to keep the state strong.
Okay.
Thank you.
When we speak about Islamic Ummah is not the same as Islamic State. But you seem to be saying that we need to reconstitute the Islamic Ummah in the modern era by means of an Islamic political system. Now, this is not a new argument, but this is a 20th century argument. This is not a 19th century argument in modern Islamic thought. Take the example of Muhammad Abdu of Egypt, or Sir Ahmad Khan of India that you are familiar with. They never argued on behalf of establishing an Islamic state as a means of reconstituting the Islamic Ummah. They said that we can reconstitute Islamic Ummah without an Islamic state. This was very clear in their own writings. Whereas the argument of establishing a political system to safeguard the Islamic Ummah is a 20th century argument appearing primarily with force in the writings and activities of Sheikh Hassan Banna in Egypt, in the writings and activities of, as you know, Maududi in India and later on Pakistan. But this is a novel phenomenon that has to be understood in the context of Islamic responses to colonialism in both situations. Egypt was dominated by the British when the Ikhwan appeared in 1928. India was controlled by the British as well when the Jamaat appeared in Lahore in 1941. So one has to understand that in that sense. But what I'm trying to say that this is true. This is one major Islamic argument that in order to constitute the Islamic Ummah in the present time, we need to have an Islamic political system. That's to say an Islamic state, such as in Iran. But this is only one Islamic argument. Because in the 19th century, this argument was not forceful at all within Islamic circles.
Actually, what was happening in the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, it was a struggle for freedom. And we were nations. You are using the word Ummah. Where the Ummah exists? There is no Ummah at all. Allama Iqbal was the spokesman for this Ummah, the biggest. But he had to concede in his lectures. No Muslim Ummah exists today.
So we have Muslims but not Ummah.
Yes. We have Muslim nations. He said, instead we have Muslim nations. And now we have Muslim countries. That's all. There's no Ummah. Ummah must have an Imam. The same root, Imam and Ummah. There's no Ummah. We have to reconstitute it through a truly Islamic state.
I would like to
That's
get
helpful.
your
That's very
guidance
Helpful. Thank you.
on the second part of your presentation. We haven't talked about economy. I will seek your guidance on some of the points. As you know, there has been a debate about the Islamization of economy in Pakistan. Some kind of interest-free banking was instituted under Ziaul Haq's government in this country. First, I would like your views about the type of interest-free system that was instituted here. But more fundamentally, I would like you to reflect upon the impact on the government financing of Islamic economic system that you are suggesting. Would an Islamic tax code be capable of funding a modern government? And how does Pakistan's current tax regime based on sales tax, income tax, import-export fit into the Islamic code? And finally, how Pakistan will borrow in international markets?
If I can remember, whatever you have said, number one, I don't say that the banking system that was proposed by Zia and later on by the Sharia court is 100% Islamic. There is element of riba and interest in that. Based on Bai' Muajjal and Bai' Murabaha. If you buy this cup cash, it is 10 rupees. If you pay me after 1 month, it is 11 rupees. What is this? Actually, during the monarchy region of Islam, history of Islam, two types of interest and riba entered our fiqh under the influence of the rulers. Number one, this Bai' Murabaha and Bai' Muajjala, it is interest. Number two, the absentee landlordism, it is interest. It's haram. It's haram, forbidden according to Imam Abu Hanifa. It is haram and forbidden according to Imam Malik. It is haram and forbidden according to Shafi'i. But only the person who accepted that office, government office, disciple of Imam Abu Hanifa, Qazi Abu Yusuf, he declared it to be lawful, along with Imam Muhammad. So these are the things, these are the realities over here. And true Islamic economic system can be established only after a truly Islamic revolution.
What about the taxes?
Yes, taxes are allowed. Import tax, export tax, they were there in the pious caliphate. Zaraib, they were called.
So you do not agree with the argument given by some of the ulama that after you collect zakat, State cannot impose any tax.
No.
What about international trade? How Pakistan is going to interact with international monetary agencies, international finance, international trade?
If we have this self-respect, we shall be on our own feet, on our own legs, and we shall deal with the people. If we are strong enough, they will need to deal with us, and they will deal with us on our own terms. But if we are weak, है जुर्म ज़ईफ़ी की सज़ा मर के वफ़ा जात.
Can I just expand on this? Because the economic aspect of your talk this morning was the shortest bit, and to my way of thinking, the economy is the root of everything. Because if you cannot live, you cannot eat, and so forth.
If you cannot eat, you cannot live.
You cannot live. You cannot, if you haven't. Yeah, obviously. No, this is not the point of what I want to say. The essence of your argument is what I would call Islam in one country. And the problem of the lack of analysis of imperialism and its economic forces, however strong you are overlooking and you are ignoring. Because the essence of imperialism today is through the world bodies of the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO. And through these mechanisms, the Western world, and in particular the United States, have controlled most of the third world. And none of this comes out. And however you organize internally, you cannot ignore the institutions and the forces of imperialism. And as far as I can see, you are. Can you comment on that?
What was the beginning? How did you begin?
The beginning is Islam in one country.
No. Islam has to become global, and that is the destiny, as I believe. But it will have to start from one country. Just as it started from the Arabian Peninsula, and then that was through conquest.
This is Lenin.
This
is Lenin.
But I'm saying what I mean. I have never read Lenin. I have never read.
You should.
But for me, Quran is enough, and the life of the Prophet is enough. I need not read Lenin or Ho Chi Minh or somebody else. So it has to spread then. And I said yesterday, at that time, at the time of the Prophet, the spread was through conquest. Now because you have the television, you have the IT, you have all these measures, you can propagate the ideology throughout the world. And if you produce a sample, a model of true Islamic state, humanity is in search of a just social order. It is running from east to west and west to east, from monarchy to capitalism, from capitalism to communism, from communism back to, what is it? The soul of humanity, is in search of a just social order.
But we have some disagreement here, do we not, on what constitutes a just social order. You and I don't agree, as we have disagreement around the table.
Yes, brother, you might have a concept of your own, and I would very much like to know that. But here I have to say and present before you the concept of Islam.
We understand that. But we also acknowledge, do we not, that just social order, that we have a variety of interpretations of what just social order is and or should be.
And only a model will prove. What happened in USSR? One party, no right of vote for the citizens whatsoever. Only one party government.
That's not how it started. That's how it ended. It ended as a single party state because of the process of the revolution. The original idea was not as it turned out.
Whatever might have happened, but that was the fact. And I told you we shall have, multiple party system.
I have a question. Now, to me, since we have means of provocating
Propagating.
Yeah, propagating Islam, introducing ideas, etc., with the means of TVs, internets, and a lot of things that you've said. Instead of establishing an Islamic state with a revolution and having a model of state or a state model, let us have a state model Muslim. Model Muslim, one person, and then propagate that model person to 6 billion people instead of putting very strong borders and then having confrontation and a lot of dangers. Now, this is, I think, is possible and much easier by having a model Muslim person and then exemplifying.
What is the prophetic model? Did he go on preaching and preaching and preaching and preaching? Did he send preachers to other countries?
Yes.
No. After he had success.
Let us think. First,
after he had success in Arabian.
No, let us think about Yemen people. Some people came to Prophet and they said, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Then he said, he asked Prophet, what is my duty? He said, you should go to Yemen and then preach to others. This is, I mean, but if we go to...
It was after the establishment of the Islamic State in Medina.
Yes.
Yeah, no, after.
Yes,
yeah.
After it.
And
you know, he didn't send emissaries anywhere before the Hudaybiyah, which Quran calls Inna Fatahna Laka Fathan Mubina. Only after that he sent people and he sent letters of inviting the monarchs and kings. So actually we have a prophetic model before us, and that is to establish an Islamic state, make it a model for humanity, come and see with your own eyes, this is Islam, and that will be the biggest preacher.
Let's go back to Roger's question. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Some part of your speech, I mean, your talk, you said that Islamic State is only for the 20 years of what we call it,
full Islamic state.
Yes. And then, but later on, you said that Islam is spread all over the world. Now, it is, when we see this, and when Prophet took Islam as a personal model to others, it spread quite fast and quite effectively.
Not at all.
Then
the personal model at Makkah. How many people accepted Islam at Makkah? For 13 years, he was himself preaching.
Yeah, but those people...
But what was the case?
But those people were the good examples.
Brother, we must look to history as it is.
Yeah, but when they were good examples, it spread quite fast, okay, although it was very difficult in the first case. But afterwards, you also accept that it's deteriorated from its original, say, line.
It came one step down. Just, you know, if you have 6 stories building and the final 6 story is gone, 5 were intact. Islamic law was enforced by the kings also. The Sharia was enforced. But the political system was not Islamic now.
Dr. Mumtaz Ahmed will make the last comment as an insider.
In the lighter vein, I just wanted to ask you something. When you began your presentation yesterday, you said there are 3 forms of creations. Then you talked about 3 types of jihad and 3 stages of resistance. And every level had its own 3 sub-levels. And when I was reading last night your pamphlet on religious obligations of Muslim women, you talk about 3 levels of our religious duties and then 3 differences between women's obligations and men's obligations. And the second level, you talk again the 3 circles of dawah. And when I read your active agenda for the Muslim Ummah, what do I find? It has 3 action point program. My question is there some mystical fascination with Trinity?
Yes, Trinity.
A good joke. a refreshing laughter.
Are we done? Because, Narma wanted to ask a question and I have a comment to make too. Can we take a few minutes?
Well, if you have the patience.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I actually was very touched by your reference to your concern for humanity at large in the last couple of minutes. And I thought that possibly should be the crux of the whole thing. And I was trying to understand in my own mind that in your model, which you have presented, you are telling the minorities, hey, you give up some things, but I give you protection. That's what I read. That you give up certain things, you will lose certain benefits of so-called citizenship, but there is a trade-off in that I give you protection. Protection is a huge zimma, is a huge, huge responsibility. It's a huge word. People seek protection, they want security, they want assurance about some kind of stability, about their way of life, about various things. Okay, without dilating on it. And what I was thinking in a constructive way of suggestion was this, that possibly if there could be some kind of a comparative evaluation of your model vis-a-vis the democratic structure, the compassionate, conservative capitalism or something which is propagated, that as to the likely advantages and disadvantages that accrue to minorities, because eventually we are looking for harmony of some kind. And minorities are not essentially based on religion, they can be based on various things, and minorities emerge, new minorities. If Pakistan was 100% Muslim, even then new minorities will emerge. There will be sectarian, there are more Shias killed in Pakistan than Sikhs or Hindus in the last 50 years. So I see that Sikhs and Hindus possibly, whatever their small population is, they have been very safe. Somehow the Zimma has been taken and they have been protected, whereas the Muslim Zimma has not been taken in India and they've been killed in large numbers. But they have other opportunities. Is there some kind of a potential trade-off? Is there in the aggregate a possibility that we can create a more humane society? Because your concern, expressed concern of your faith and every faith is eventually that we are all God's children, whatever our calling, and God intended for us that this life and this world should be for us to live, to love God, to love God's creation, to do service, and to realize the higher truth, and to realize it living here in this world with one another. So that's where my
all
suggestion.
those things that you have said are very precious and they must be sought out. But what about the law?
That is not my problem. I'm looking for a human society,
what about the law?
And law
what
will
about
follow.
The system?
Law
there
should
can
follow.
be one law. There can be one system. So you have to establish the law and the system of your own and give the maximum facilities to those who don't agree with you. That's all. Thank you.
We will reassemble here at 6:15 sharp. 6:15.